Do you find yourself constantly at odds with your partner? Do you feel as every conversation drives a wedge between the two of you instead of bringing you closer together? Are you tired of feeling stuck in the same cycle of push and pull with your partner, moving from one misunderstanding to a miscommunication and back? Are unresolved conflicts causing tension and distance with your partner? Do you want to transform the way you approach conflicts in your relationship? And are you ready to move beyond the power struggles that leave you feeling drained and disconnected from your partner? And learn how to communicate effectively and resolve issues in a way that strengthens your relationship? Join me after the intro for a conversation with a very special friend with whom we will answer this and many more questions. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's start. Hi, I'm Rossana D, and this is Forgive and Thrive, a podcast where we explore what thriving in life means and how we can achieve it, irrespective of our past, current condition, and expectations that those around us or society in general may have. Let's go. Welcome to the Forgive and Thrive show. Picture this. You are in a relationship that feels like a roller coaster ride. One moment you are riding high on the waves of love and connection, and the next you are plummeting into a sea of tension and uncertainty. Does it sound familiar? If so, you are not alone. Many couples struggle to navigate conflicts effectively, often leading to heightened tension and distance in the relationship. And if you are tired of the same old arguments and ready to chart a new course for your relationship, you are in the right place. Today, we embark on a journey of self-discovery, connection, and growth. We dive deep into the heart of what it means to navigate the push-pull, master conflict resolution in relationships, and explore the art of effective communication that can take our interaction from discord to harmony. And we dive into this fascinating topic in a conversation with our guest, Abi Collins. Abi is a relationship mentor, psychology graduate, and lifelong student of love. Growing up, Abby watched as her parents loved hard and fought often. Later in life, Abby found that her own relationships were plagued by the same hurtful push-pull dynamic. That was until she made it her mission to learn how to love well and fell down the rabbit hole of relational development. Today, Abby experiences a deeper connection with her current partner than she ever thought possible, and has the pleasure of teaching other women how to move from the power struggle stage of their relationship to the true love stage. Hi, Abby. Welcome to the Forgive and Thrive show. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh my gosh, Rosanna, what an amazing introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, I'm intrigued by the whole topic, the push and pull. I want to understand a little bit more about that because I suspect that it might not just be in love relationship, that perhaps these are dynamics that we have in all kind of relationship. So I think everybody will benefit from learning about it. And I'm so much into communicating well, and understanding how bad communication can affect us, especially from an emotional and psychological point of view. So I'm really intrigued by this topic. But before we enter into the matter of the day, I would like to start with you, because I mentioned that everything was very personal and you started very early on watching your parents first and then dynamics in your own relationships to understand that perhaps there was something different that could have been done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all stories, whenever we're talking about love, for me, they're all personal, because each and every one of us has an experience of love. It's a universal thing. So, of course, for me, my experience growing up, which is where my career began, was watching my parents and experiencing love with my parents, where we were a very close-knit family. We were very emotional, very expressive. And so I experienced that connection very young. And of course, that set me on the journey of knowing like this is possible. I can have that connection. But also, my parents struggled with mental health issues, alcohol issues, and not knowing how to handle that. So conflict was a huge thing in my household. So we would have one day where we were so connected and so, loving each other. And then another day where there would be an explosive argument and it didn't feel safe anymore. So that kind of my infatuation with love or my curiosity with love really began then, and my journey to discover how can we have relationships as adults where we have the connection, we have the intimacy, we feel seen, we feel understood, we're not avoiding our feelings, but we still feel safe and we know how to handle conflict together. And that's really how I came to do the work that I do today.
Mm. This sounds so familiar, familiar to me, but I believe a lot of people can resonate really with this dynamics and these highs and very lows.
Mm.
So, can we explain a little bit of this dynamic, how it develops, if there are common threads that we can perhaps recognize and anticipate? Because if we are aware and perhaps we can recognize some of the sign, then
Mm.
I would argue that perhaps we can do something before it is too late or before that conflict becomes irreparable.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it all begins, and I love what you say about being able to anticipate before it gets too late, because so often couples will struggle and struggle and struggle on, or even as you said in friendships too, will struggle and struggle on, and then it gets to a point where we're at breaking point and now we need to handle things. But there is a point before then when we can start to think, how do I feel about the way we're handling conflict together? Do I feel like when things are great, they're great. But when something happens, when you or me get triggered, suddenly it's the Wild West and there are no rules. One of us might just exit the building emotionally or literally, or one of us might start getting bigger and louder and it feels scary. And how does that fit in with the kind of relationship that we want to be having? Because so often I think we have a vision for our relationship when things are good. And then we just kind of shove the conflict part in like a separate room instead of seeing actually there might be a way that we can actually handle conflict together. So I would say it starts with asking yourself, if you're in a relationship right now, to ask yourself, how do I feel about the way we do conflict? Do I feel like we're able to share, to talk, to have the difficult conversations, to share our truth, to be vulnerable, and to face things head on? And do I feel like we can do it safely? And if the answer to either of those is no, then that's a really good invitation to start thinking, okay, what are some other ways that we can do this? And even if you're single at the moment, you can still ask yourself, okay, what is my relationship with conflict in general, with my friends, with my family, at work, in my past relationships? Because we're all in a relationship with conflict. And it's, in my opinion, it's our great work is to face it and to be brave and to go there and to heal our relationship with conflict.
This is definitely something difficult. In fact, I would argue that perhaps most of the time people tend either to engage head on in the conflict, but perhaps not in the right way, or to run away.
Yeah.
So, what is your experiences with these two approaches, and
Mm.
what is the impact on the relationship and in the resolution of that conflict in general?
Yeah. I think you've just summarized so well the two main approaches to conflict that we have. So one of them is, okay, I'm going to go head first into this. So when we're in a conflict together, I'm going to approach you. I'm going to get closer to you. I'm maybe going to get a bit louder. I'm going to say to you, hey, listen to me, understand me. Let's get this sorted. But I can get a bit scary. And the other one is, oh, this is too scary. I'm going to back away. I'm going to remove myself from the connection. And the interesting thing about these two different approaches is that in any relationship, we tend to find that people with these two styles tend to be attracted to one another. So, isn't that fascinating that we end up in relationships where one of us polarizes to, I'm going to express, I'm going to want to talk about it, I'm going to get louder and bigger and emotional. And the more you back away from me, the more scared I feel because I feel abandoned by you. So, I'm going to get even louder because I need you to hear me. And the other person is like, whoa, I feel really overwhelmed by your energy here. I feel totally engulfed by what you're saying. I feel criticized. I feel scared. And I need to be away from you right now. And I need to numb out. And of course, one style impacts the other. So the more your partner retreats, the louder you get, or the more your partner gets louder, the more you retreat. So this is one of the most common dances, the push-pull dance that happens in relationships. Most often it tends to be the woman who pushes, who gets louder, and it tends to be the man who gets quieter and withdrawn, but not always. I've worked with women who tend to withdraw as well. So it can be either, but that dynamic plays out so often in our relationships, which is why it's so important for us to learn about this dynamic and to find a way out of it.
Hmm. That is so interesting. Is it because women are more able to express perhaps their emotions more and
Mm.
they want to go through and they are more analytic than men? Men tend to go a little bit on the synthesis perhaps, and
Mm.
they might not be willing to share their emotions so much. Is that one of the reasons that you think there is this gender difference?
I think that's a really good point. Whenever we're looking at the differences, I tend to think along two lines. That we've got the social and then we've got the biological, right? So if we're looking at the social, which I think is kind of what you're touching on here, you know, as a society, as women, I believe that we are very often given the responsibility of being the nurturers in our society, right? We are the social landscapers. We are looking after children. We are looking after the social landscape in our relationships. So very often when we get into a romantic relationship, there's kind of like an assumption that as a woman, I need to be responsible for our connection. And very often, the man will also unconsciously feel that it is the woman's responsibility. So that's the first piece, is that yes, there is a social aspect to it where women tend to be more responsible for the connection. I will say as well, there's an interesting, if we look at the biology and the history of how we've evolved as species, there's another really interesting thing that to me, I just geek out on all of this stuff. And so as women, we are obviously designed to be able to breastfeed our children. Now, what's really interesting about this is that in order for us to be able to produce breast milk for our children, we need to be able to have an access to the hormone oxytocin. Okay, so this is all to do with the feel-good hormone of oxytocin. So as women, we have a slightly better access to producing this hormone. In other words, to self-soothing, because we've had to, even when times are really hard, we still have to breastfeed our child. So we have to be able on some level to produce this oxytocin, even when we're under a lot of stress. Whereas if you think about the role that men have typically played, I'm talking a while back now, where they have been the protectors to make sure that threat stays out. Well, what do you need to do for that? You need to be hyper vigilant and you need to be willing to be aggressive. So now you bring all of that into our dynamics now, and you have a woman who maybe has a little bit better capacity to self-soothe. So even during a conflict, she might be able to stay in the heat of it longer. And you also have a man who, on some level, has a more powerful connection to his aggression. And most men don't want to be aggressive with their partner. So you'll notice one of the things that a lot of men say in their minds during a conflict, especially if they have an avoidant attachment style, which is what we're talking about, they'll say things like, just don't engage, just calm down, just back away, because he doesn't want to be aggressive. So you have a whole mix of these biological factors, you have the social factors piled on top, and then you have the fact that we're not educated about conflict.
Mm. There is one word that comes to mind listening to this explanation, and that is misconception about what could happen. For example, you mentioned a man that doesn't want to engage and doesn't want to be very aggressive with their partner.
Mhm.
So, are there misconceptions that perhaps by going into that conversation, actually things could become worse, or any other misconceptions around conflict in general that we have to perhaps bear in mind?
Yeah, I think conflict is one of the most misunderstood aspects of our relationships that we have, for me personally, because, well, one of the things, okay, I'd be curious. Can I throw a question back to you and we can do a little experiment?
Let's
So, so if I was to say to you, what is conflict in a relationship? Like if you had to define it and without overthinking, but just kind of saying like whatever comes to your mind, what are some of the associations that you have with the word conflict?
It's, I would say it's more than just a disagreement. It's intertwined with fear, perhaps. It's very emotional. It can become very, very emotional because a conflict without emotion is a conversation for me. So I don't know if it makes sense, but we can agree to disagree, right? We can have a conversation adult to adult,
Hmm.
and you know agree to disagree. You can have your opinion, I can have my opinion. The not knowing enough about conflicts, obviously I'm not the expert here, but for me it's really when the emotion comes in, when fear comes in, and perhaps, as I said, misconceptions. When there are, we have an idea of what could happen if we go in a certain route, but we don't know because we have to experience that conflict in order to see how it's going to be. I don't know if it makes sense at all.
It does completely. And what I hear you saying is that it's to do with being activated, emotionally activated, right?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And I think your answer is evidence of the work that you do because it's a very conscious answer. And I love it. What I would say is that for most of us, I think the association when we think of conflict is arguing and shouting and loud and danger. And one of the biggest reframes that I would offer for that is what happens when we flip that idea and when we start seeing conflict as a rupture to our connection, which is similar to what you were saying, right? So now, all of a sudden, conflict can be something that happens silently. You might say something to me, and I feel hurt or angry. And all of a sudden, our connection is disrupted. There's something in the way of us feeling connected, which is my feeling of anger. But I don't say anything. I never tell you. Now, I might say to someone, oh, me and Rosanna, we never have conflict. But with this new definition, yes, we do. We do have conflict. It's just that I have swallowed it and I've turned it into internal conflict. So I think the biggest misconception when it comes to conflict is that conflict has to be loud, it has to be big, it has to be a fight, and that it's best to avoid it. When actually, the truth is, when in our closest relationships, we are constantly going in and out of conflict, which means we're constantly going in and out of connection. 1 minute we're connected, we're having a great time, we're laughing over breakfast, we're getting the kids ready, we're going on holiday, and then we're running late and I'm irritated by you because you're late and you said you'd be on time. And that's a conflict, that's a disconnection. So it's natural, it's normal, it's healthy, it's going to happen until the day that we go away from this mortal coil. And our work is to not avoid it, but to learn how to handle it, how to repair, how to share, how to communicate, and how to come back into connection again. And that is what I would say is the biggest misconception that we have about conflict, that it's bad, it's ugly, it's wrong. And actually, it's normal, it's healthy, and it's something that is a part of everyone's life.
I love what you're saying, and I would like to take it one step further, if you don't mind,
Mm.
and mention boundaries. You mentioned, whenever we think that someone is doing something to us, perhaps we just swallow whatever has happened and we don't face
Mhm.
that problem. That is a kind of boundary that has been crossed, and we don't acknowledge that boundary. So how much of the work is the couple or the pair working together, and how much is
Mm.
individual work and inner work where I need to understand myself, I need to understand what my boundaries are, I need to understand how to communicate them in a healthy way, and then perhaps we can talk, we can have a conflict, we can resolve it, we can go all the way.
This is such a beautiful question because so much of our relationships, we think the question is this something I need to do myself? Is this something I need to handle myself? Is it my own healing work that I have to do? Or is it something that we need to work out together? And most of the time, the answer is both. It's both. Because if we're in a dynamic together and we're deciding we're going to be in this dynamic tomorrow, the next day, the next day, the next day, if we are just handling our stuff by ourselves, we're not really in a relationship together. We might be in the same room together, but we're not really relating. However, if we put everything on the other person, like, I need you to do this, I need you to do that, then all of a sudden we're not taking care of our part of the dynamic. So it's both. And what I would say with this push-pull dynamic, there's a couple of things. So firstly, I love having agreements in a relationship. Like what can we agree to together? And these agreements may change, they may grow, they may shift. We may sometimes fall a bit short of them and then we have to apologize but at least we have these agreements in place. For example, we agree that whenever we have a conflict, we will communicate that to each other and we won't keep it to ourselves. Another agreement, we agree that we will always come back together again and repair after a conflict. Neither of us are going to abandon ship And if we do need space, it's for 10 minutes, it's for half an hour, it's for 24 hours at the most, because any more than that is not going to be good for us. So having some really foundational agreements can be a great way of creating those guardrails, just so that we know actually we are still in it together. And then also we have our individual work. So the person who is doing more of the pushing, more of the emotion, more of the communicating, as that kind of person, our work is to learn how to breathe through our feelings, to process our feelings, to communicate in a way that isn't blaming, isn't criticizing, that doesn't have contempt. So using I statements, for example, I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel this, instead of you never do this, you never do that. Right? So learning how to communicate in a way that our partner can actually hear, and learning how to self-soothe. If you're the other partner who tends to go into their shell, well, your work is to learn how to tell your partner, I need 10 minutes, I need 20 minutes, and I'll be back. That's really important. I'll be back. And then you come back. So for both of us, it's learning how to self-soothe, how to look after our inner child, or whatever word you want to use. Relationship coach Jason Gaddis says our scared animal, which I love. Look after our scared animal, and then to come back together and to repair. So it's kind of both. We want to have the agreements, we want to do it as a team, but we also want to be doing our individual work as well.
I totally love that. And I love what you just stressed, that the importance sometimes to take some time off and say, we need 10 minutes. And perhaps that is one of the misconceptions as well. When we are in that moment, in that conflict, we have to resolve it. Otherwise, we cannot leave the room.
Oh
And,
my gosh.
and I think that is sometimes more dangerous for the relationship than just going separate ways for 10 minutes, just regroup, recenter, and go back into the room and continue the conversation. So thank you very much for that. But the other thing that comes to mind then is we have all our agreements in place. We understand which side we lean, and we tend to apply all the good things. We tend to communicate in the right way. So using I statement, focusing perhaps on what has happened rather than you did this, which can be very off-putting perhaps. And so we all do all these things. Then can conflict strengthen a relationship? Can be something that can take this pair of people to a new level?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. Rosanna, oh my gosh. Yes, this is the whole basis of what I do with my clients. So my clients come to me because they want more intimacy, usually. 9 times out of 10, it's because they want more connection, more intimacy. But most of the time, we don't think that the solution to that is through conflict. We think the solution is through sexy underwear or going more date nights, which is fun, nothing wrong with that. But we don't think that it's through conflict. But this is the reason I'm going to put it to you. And for me, it's so powerful why it is that we feel more connected when we do conflict as a team. It's because for most of us, when we were growing up, we had imperfect parents. They tried their best. They did what they were capable of doing, but they weren't perfect. And so what happened very often for a lot of us is we have two primary needs in life. One of them, well, this is, what I believe anyway. One of them is our need for belonging. And the second is our need for authenticity, self-connection. And when we're growing up, very often there was a moment where we had a feeling. Let's say that feeling was anger or sadness or even excitement. And our parents told us that's too much. Okay, you're too excited, calm down. Or cheer up, don't be sad. Or don't be angry at me, right? So we learn as children, in order for me to keep this attachment, this connection with my parent, who at this point is my world, is my son, in order for me to have that belonging, well, I need to choose, right? I need to choose between my belonging, my need for belonging, or my need for authenticity. And when you're 5 years old or 6 years old, that is no choice because you have to choose belonging, right? So we choose belonging. And then we have this wound around, is it possible for me to belong with someone and also to be fully myself? And the person we're with also has that wound. Is it possible for me to belong and to also be fully myself? And what mastering conflict does is it allows us finally, for the first time ever, maybe in our whole life, to feel that we can belong to each other, with each other, to this relationship. We can have that connection. And also we can have our sovereignty, we can have our individual experiences, and we can have both. And that is why learning how to do conflict is, in my opinion, one of the single most intimacy building things that we can ever do.
Mm. Is it that a lot of the conflicts and the fact that very often they turn up to be bad, so we don't navigate, we don't handle these conflicts well, because even as adults, we are choosing to belong rather than to be authentic. And typically when we decide that finally we cannot go over that anymore, we need to finally be authentic, we need to be ourselves, then the relationship comes to an end.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so often that is the case. You know, we get to a point and we think, I have pushed aside my needs for so long for the connection. And now I can't do it anymore. I need myself again. Now, the good news is that, as we've just been exploring, it is possible to do that within your relationship. But the thing is, we're not talking about it enough, which is why I was so excited to come on this podcast with you, because if we're not talking about it, then it seems like the only option is to either do conflict badly and just kind of accept it, or avoid conflict entirely and just swallow it and get resentful, or to end the relationship. But there is this other way. And that's why I love what we're talking about, because it is possible as long as we have the tools, as long as we know some of the practices, as long as we have that mindset, we can actually find a way through.
Mm. So let's go into that. We talk about a little bit about the mindset, which is sitting down before a conflict arises and say, let's have agreements. Let's decide how we want to handle that kind of situation. That perhaps is already mindset, isn't it? What sort of strategies? We talk about communication is perhaps good communication is a good tool to have in our toolbox. What else do?
I think communication is a huge part of it, because your body is wired. We're relational beings. Your body is wired to pick up on my eyebrows, my tone, all of that. So if I say something to you and it has a slight tone of judgment, you're going to pick up on that. Your nervous system is so wise. Or if I don't respond to you, you're going to pick up on that, right? So I think a huge part of it is communication and admitting to ourselves, even as the anxious leaning partner, and we tend to fall into the habit sometimes of thinking that we're a little bit better at this. And maybe we are, but also there are things that we need to master too, right? So really going there and just being so radically honest with ourselves, just holding up the mirror and asking ourselves, where can I grow with this? Asking your partner and they'll answer. Where can I grow? The other piece is curiosity and compassion. Because even if you don't have the techniques, like in my program, when I was working with these women, they didn't always get the techniques right when they went and they practiced with their partner. They were learning these new techniques. But if they came to the conversation with that energy and that spirit of, okay, I want to be curious here. I'm going to park all of my stuff to one side just for a moment. And I want to be curious about you. I want to understand your reality because even though you're pissing me off right now, I still want to understand what is going on for you and why it is that you feel this way, what it is that went on in your childhood, what it is that went on earlier this week. I want to understand because there's something I'm not getting. So I think that energy of like real genuine curiosity, real genuine compassion, and just dropping anything that isn't those things, dropping the contempt, dropping the superiority, dropping the I am right and you're wrong, and just really sinking into, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable with you. I want you to be vulnerable with me. And I just want to hear you. And I think that energy is really powerful just for bringing down your partner's guard and just for creating that connection.
Mm. I think you made an excellent point here that curiosity and compassion together are necessary when we are, handling a tricky situation. And to me, are perhaps the most undervalued aspect of communication, which is listening. Sometimes we think about communicating as just talking with the other person, but a lot of that communication is about listening, and not just listening, to hear the word, but to actually actively listening to the other person. And especially, I would argue that during a conflict, perhaps we are so adamant to make our points to come true that we forget about listening, isn't it? So, how can we stay curious and compassionate and listen to the other person,
Mhm.
so that we can come together and really resolve that
Mhm.
conflict?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. The first thing I would say is it depends how triggered we are, right? Because if we're triggered, let's say beyond, if we were to do a scale 1 to 10, one being I'm as we are now, completely base level, and then 10 being I am so overwhelmed right now. I'm full of adrenaline and cortisol and I can't even think straight. If we're over a 5, that's going to be really hard to listen to each other. And the reason for that is because when we go into that survival mode, literally our hearing gets compromised, our peripheral vision gets compromised. So we're literally not able to hear each other anymore. So if we're over a certain trigger or if our partner's over a certain trigger, it really is best, as you said before, just to take a break, take a time out, calm down, and get into the space where we're now able to hear each other. Now, when we're in that space, I think it's really important to come into that with the acknowledgement that my reality is one thing and your reality is another thing, right? So your reality doesn't negate my reality. And even if you remember something that is different from what I remember, that's okay because it's your reality. So when a couple starts to embrace that idea, one of the things that you'll notice is that you stop going to correct the other person and to say, no, you got that wrong, and to justify, because suddenly you're able to say, oh, that was your reality, right? So I think that's really key, just being able to see, to allow your partner to have their reality and for them to be able to allow you to have yours. And then from there, it's so much easier to listen. And one of the things I would say is key to listen for is for the feeling words, because it's very tempting when we're arguing, when we're talking, to get very thinky. And you did this and you said that, and then we went here and then we went there and blah 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 blah. But just try and scan what they're saying. What are they feeling? Is it sad? Is it scared? Is it frustrated? And you can ask them. It sounds like you were feeling frustrated when I didn't pick up the phone. Is that what you were feeling? And they'll say, yeah, yeah. Or they'll say, no, that wasn't it. And they'll tell you. And so from there, you get to start and you can ask questions, and it just bringing it back down to the feeling, just keeping it really simple. And that's what I would say is the key to really listening.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose it's that ability of stepping in someone's shoes for a moment and see from with their eyes basically
Yeah.
what they are experiencing. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
And talking about feelings, very often when we are navigating conflicts, emotions run wild. Uh, right? We are on this emotional roller coaster, as I always say. And sometimes, especially if we are not having this very adult
Mhm.
conflict resolution, we can swallow, as you mentioned before, a lot of these things happening and a lot of these emotions
Mhm.
with whatever word has been said, right?
Mhm.
How do we release those emotions, or do we need to release those emotions and help ourselves before interacting with the other person to resolve the conflict? And if we need to do something,
Mhm.
what would you advise? And can forgiveness
Mhm.
be a tool to help in going in that direction and thrive
Mhm.
while resolving our conflicts?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with you that during a conflict, our emotions we can feel emotions that we didn't know we had in us, right? So yeah, they're powerful. What I would say is giving ourselves permission to feel, for most of us, is huge. What am I feeling just now? I had this experience this week where I was speaking with my partner and he said something, and I felt like a hurt feeling, like, oh, I feel kind of hurt. And I was keeping it to myself because he was talking and I knew he didn't mean to hurt me, but he was talking. And, I realized that when we bottle this up, it snowballs, it gets bigger, and then it turns into something else. So for me, it was the right thing to do in that moment to say, sweetheart, can I pause you for 2 seconds? It's just something happened for me just then, and I want to share it with you. And we kind of worked through it together. Did we work through it perfectly? No, because I'm human, and because he's human, and because you're human. So one of the things I would say is that we're allowed to be messy. We're allowed to be messy. And this idea that we can do conflict perfectly in this neat little way, it's like, yes, sometimes that happens and you can high five each other and say, we did a really good job today. And then other times you're going to come back together and you can say, yeah, we were a little bit crunchy that day, weren't we? And that's part of the process. So being able to have the conversations afterwards, to reflect on it, to make mistakes sometimes, I would say that is more important than trying to get it perfectly right, because over time you're going to find something that works for you, and what works for you might not work in my relationship, but so we get to kind of try things out. So there's no one size fits all with emotions. It might be that one day, if your partner's really overwhelmed, you take it to yourself first and you work through things first and then you share it with them. It might be another day that you really need to tell them, you need to get it off your chest. But it's that process of really working it through as a team, that spirit. I think that's the most important thing.
Mhm.
And the second part of your question, which is to do with forgiveness, self forgiveness, I think this is huge. And this comes exactly to what we're saying about forgiving ourselves for being imperfect, forgiving ourselves for being messy, forgiving ourselves for being human, forgiving ourselves for our little wounded inner child who sometimes comes up, forgiving ourselves for our scared animal that sometimes comes out, forgiving ourselves for our past and the way we've been in the past when we didn't know better, and forgiving ourselves for the future, for the fact that we're always going to be a work in progress. And just allowing that is huge for me. And I would love to hear, because that's your theme, I would love to hear if that resonates with you as well.
Completely, completely. I start with self-forgiveness all the time, and I always say, well, whatever happened in the past, I cannot change that, unfortunately, but I can learn from it. And most importantly, I can decide and give myself permission, as you said, to move forward and to make sure that whatever that was doesn't affect my past, but is not going to affect my future. And I think that is very important. And sometimes we get stuck in things that can be big or small. It doesn't really matter, but we still get stuck because we get so attached to whatever happened. We get attached to situations, to words, to people, and it's very difficult to let it go. And sometimes the only way is to let it go and to say, well, this is not serving me anymore. I need to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, with that, I would love to come back on you. Is there anything that you are planning, that you are working right now that you want to share with us and that perhaps can be interesting for our listeners?
Oh my gosh. Well, yes, of course. I've got my Facebook group. Whoever your listeners are, if they want to come and join, and if they're a woman, then they're more than welcome to. We've got like a little intimate group and we share. It's an amazing community and I love it there. And then I've also got my program that we mentioned, which is again a very intimate program. I really love working with women intimately. Of course, that's the nature of my job. So yeah, and that will be, well, I'm not sure when that's going to be, but we're kind of building up to the second round. So if anyone's interested in that, then by all means get in touch with me, and I would love to connect with any of your audience. I know that they are incredible people, so yeah.
Absolutely. So if they want to find out more, where they can come,
Yeah, they can join my Facebook group. And also, I'm one of these people where I'm open to connecting with people on my personal page as well. So if they want to connect with me, send me a friend request. If they want to send me a DM on Facebook, and we can maybe link on our description, then yeah, they're more than welcome to do that. And I would love to hear from them.
Fantastic. And as always, we will put all the links in the description of today's episodes. Abby, I would like to ask you one final question out of this beautiful conversation. If there was one take-home message that you would love everybody to remember from this conversation, what that would be?
I would say that the takeaway message is that it is possible for you to have your need for belonging, to be deeply connected with your partner or with your friends, the people in your life you love, to be deeply connected with them, to feel seen, to feel understood, to feel intimately connected, and also for you to keep that connection with yourself as well.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, as we wrap up our exploration of navigating the push and pull dynamic and mastering conflict resolution in relationships, let's remember that every conflict is an opportunity for growth and deeper connection. By embracing effective communication, active listening, and unwillingness to navigate conflicts with empathy and understanding, we can all break free from the power struggle and move towards a deeper, more fulfilling connection with our partner. And remember what David Richo said, to be adult in relationship is not to be conflict free. It's to resolve conflicts mindfully. Abby, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for sharing so much about your personal story and what you do. I truly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we would love to know what you think about this topic. How is your relationship going? Do you often find yourself in a push-pull dynamic with your partner? If so, I'm sure that you will find today's episode very inspiring to reposition you on a more empowered path where, with the right tools and strategies, you can move away from the power struggle stage. But if you need extra help, don't forget to check Abby's website and work and to follow her on social media. You will find all the links in the description of today's episode. Hopefully not, but if you have been affected in any way by the topic we discussed today, as always, I invite you to seek professional help. Join me next time when we will continue exploring inspiring and challenging situations. Because remember, we are together in this journey. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this content, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell and like this video. See you in the next one.